Tonight, we're honored to present Charles Gaines in conversation with Director and Chief Curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem, Thelma Golden. I want to give a warm welcome, of course, to our Board of Trustees here with us this evening, as well as our circles of support donors, and of course, all of you museum members. You make your initiative and your support of this institution allows us to do things like these particular types of events and other educational initiatives throughout the year. I'm also happy to see and also to welcome and truly welcome those artists, students, art advocates, and enthusiasts, and so many of the community members who are here with us. Let's give them a round of applause. We're so grateful to have you. The museum was really fortunate to have two great exhibitions by Charles Gaines on view. The first, of course, is the exhibition in the Steele Gallery, was organized by ICA Miami. And this exhibition features a selection of works and a series spanning from 1992 to 2023. Together, along with that exhibition and the exhibition in our Cummings Great Hall, they demonstrate the evolution of Gaines' approach to transforming images, texts, and more into distinct visual language. I want to give a special welcome to Jean Moreno, the exhibition's curator, who's here with us this evening. So, Jean, thanks for being here. And of course, for all of you who had the opportunity to enjoy this incredible Numbers and Trees series, Arizona Trees 1, which of course is the debut of the cottonwood tree here in our home state of Arizona. To see this really enliven the Cummings Great Hall was nothing short of just truly a miracle and amazement. It's been wonderful to see just the public come in and really have the opportunity to see the full depth of a process in a series for Charles, where you actually get to see a sequence of series from tree number 1 all the way to tree number 8. So we want to thank, of course, Olga Viso, our Chief Curator here at the museum and Director of Curatorial Affairs, who's been an incredible colleague and partner throughout this series, and really just the amazement of how these types of projects come together, which was nothing more than truly a simple conversation, and just really what it's spun up to and what it's come into fruition over the last 2 years is just truly amazing. This past October, we welcomed over 45,000 members and visitors to see these two exhibitions, and it's just really wonderful, so thank you. So to get a little bit more about the program this evening, it's a very, very special program for us. And tonight we are very excited to hear from Charles himself in conversation with Thelma Golden as they reflect on these bodies of work, his practice, and his larger impact on the art world. I'm happy to share a little bit about our series tonight before we dive in. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, and now based in Los Angeles, Charles Gaines is a preeminent figure in conceptual art. He is widely known for converting images and text into numerical structures, musical notations, and other sign systems through rigorous translation mechanisms, producing everything from a painting, a drawing, sculpture, photography, sound, and of course, video. He also likes to make you a little stressed every time you walk next to that falling rock, and likes to hold that tension right there for you because you just never know when it's going to happen. His practice also explores a range of subjects, including race, class, and climate change. Gaines's work has been the subject of numerous exhibitions in the United States and around the world, and is included in prominent public collections such as the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Hammer Museum, Tate in London, and of course, we're very fortunate to have an incredible work here at Phoenix Art Museum. Tonight, Charles is joined by Thelma Golden, the Director and Chief Curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem. And for those of you in the museum world, you know what a privilege and a giant it is to have Thelma here this evening, so thank you for being here. And to give you a little bit of background on Thelma's incredible career, she began in 1987 as an intern at the Studio Museum before joining the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1988. At the Whitney, she organized numerous innovative exhibitions, including the groundbreaking 1993 Whitney Biennial and landmark exhibition, Black Male: Representations of Masculinity in American Art. In 2000, Golden returned to the Studio Museum as Deputy Director for Exhibitions and Programs. And in 2005, she was named Director and Chief Curator, succeeding Dr. Lowry Stokes Sims. And under her leadership, the Studio Museum has gained increased renown as a global leader in the exhibition of contemporary art, a center for innovative education, and a cultural anchor in the Harlem community. And finally, before I hand things over to Charles and Thelma, I'm excited to share that following our core program this evening, everyone here will have the opportunity to experience Gaines' multisensory work, Manifestos 3 from 2018. And I can assure you, seeing and witnessing a manifesto really provides you with incredible context to just how to experience Charles' art, to really open your mind and understand the idea that art in this particular case provides a question. And it provides that moment in which you try to understand and think about what you're seeing in real time and really how you experience Charles' work at a deeper level. This multimedia performance functions as a systematic transliteration of 3 revolutionary manifestos into musical notation. These notations, which are written and arranged for piano by Gaines, will be played live by pianist Richard Valitito and the live video operated by Mads Falcone. It's really an incredible and rare opportunity to experience this work, and we are all grateful for Charles for allowing us to share this evening. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Charles Gaines and Thelma Golden.
Good evening. Yes. Hello, Charles.
Hi, Thelma.
It's such a pleasure to get to do this, to be here in Phoenix, to be in this museum. You know, before starting today, Jeremy and Olga walked me around and to see not only your exhibitions, you know, I said this should be called the Charles Gaines Museum right now, given the amount of real estate, but to see the conversation that it's having with these amazing other galleries of collection in the museum was really fantastic. So first, because these are 2 distinct projects that, as Jeremy said, the great fortune to come together, can you just reflect on what it means to have these 2 bodies of work being presented at this moment? What does it feel like? What does it mean to you?
Well, it was the first time when this exhibition and the one at ICA, it was the first time that both bodies of work to some deep manifestation was exhibited.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it did was that it showed the world that I did more than write millions of numbers. Yeah, so that was a treat. I mean, it was an opportunity to demonstrate through the work that a line of thinking about making art and certain concepts that I wanted to explore that making that maintain themselves in these through these 2 domains, 2 strategies of making, the grid work and the I call it the language-based works. And so it was important to get the opportunity to see the broader practice, so that the different manifestations didn't mean that I was exploring entirely different ideas and different concerns.
Mm-hmm. You have worked with a certain kind of intense rigor around working in series. Why is that the strategy you've used to explore your ideas?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm a masochist. But it really is a situation where you're being led by the idea. So, I mean, early in my career, if I go back to graduate school, if I can reference it that far back, I was faced with this issue where I found myself unsatisfied with the standard ways or the ideas around what constitutes a work of art and what constitutes making a work of art. I was in school as a painting major, and I found myself unhappy with this idea of that the work of art is a product of your creative expression or creative imagination, or a wholly and entirely subjective practice. And I should say that my dissatisfaction with that didn't mean that I had a more general problem with that idea of art. I mean, I didn't have any problems with other people being, subjective.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I felt...
You didn't want to be.
Yeah, it's just that I felt that the manifestations of subjectivity seemed so arbitrary in relationship to me. I mean, it was just this idea. I'm supposed to see myself in the expressed object, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking around for other ways. And so the product of that exploration was that I came up with this idea of systems. It just so happened that in the case of the grid work, the system involved, and it really started with the regression series, which it's going to be screened here, mm-hmm. Where I started, I laid out a grid and calculated along an XY axis, calculated numbers, and used the sums of those calculations as the pattern, as the map for creating the form. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that involved a lot of numbers. Mm-hmm. And yeah, this is it. And so that really was it. The language was about numbers, it was about mm-hmm. grids, and it was about creating a grid that the scale was such that the numbers aggregated enough so that you could see forms and images.
Mm-hmm. So, Charles, what year was that?
About 1973.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that time,
you didn't know I was only 5 years old at the time.
So at that time in 1973, when you were imagining an art that was not subjective, thinking about creating systems as a way to make the object, was that the conversation that was happening in art? And where did you find resonance?
Yeah,
for what you were imagining.
Yeah, the conversation at the time, well, it was still this sort of rift between abstract expressionism and conceptual and minimal art. And the argument was between the expressionists and the minimalists, where the minimalists were arguing that you should take subjectivity out of the process and consider art an empirical practice. And what really means that they were saying they were trying to remove interpretation from the experience, mm-hmm. and so of course expressionism had an entirely different, and even it even went far as the minimalist and conceptualists being wholly suspicious of figuration, mm-hmm. And deciding that figuration had to be dismissed. That it was okay to use images, but they had to be mechanically produced. Mm-hmm. The idea of the drawn gesture and so forth reflected too much expression. And so so that was going on, and that wasn't a debate that I was interested in. Although I have to hand it to Fluxus and the minimalist conceptualist argument to provide ways of thinking about what I needed to do. Mm. But conceptually, I wasn't very interested in that argument because with the minimalists and the conceptualists, I disagreed about the role of representation. That they wanted to make art a purely empirical practice. I wanted to. I thought that strategy, empiricism, or the literalization art as a literal practice, was a problem for me. On the one hand, subjectivity was a problem for me, but the literalism of conceptualism was also a problem for me because it left out representation. I thought that you can include representation, not in a way of literalizing the experience of art, but bringing critical thought or critical discourse, analysis as an embedded part of the artistic process. It's not just something that critics did and applied it to the art object.
That it could be inherent to the object itself.
Yes.
And so in that, how do you define the art that you make?
Ooh. Yeah, whoa. I guess the way that I approach it is that, and after railing against subjectivity for the last, 2 minutes, the problem that I had with artist practice was a personal and subjective one. That the making of art didn't mean much to me because I was so invested in discursive and critical thought and intellectual practices, but not enough to be a scholar or an academic about it. I had to struggle with the idea when I discovered this about myself. How can I bring in the idea of analytical, the intellectual practices in a work of art? And I realized I had to do this because it reflected my temperament. That's the identity thing. So I discovered that at least my mom told me that I used to, as a 4 or 5-year-old, I used to ask her questions about Kant and Heidegger. And I didn't. But she did say, I got the story about birds, right? So she said that, she said that I often would ask her unanswerable questions.
Right.
And that was, the bird thing is that, walking with my mother, I was seeing chickens and hens in Charleston. And I was wondering why I wasn't why it was me and why I wasn't a chicken or a hen. Or even, I asked her, I said, is when I die, will I come back as a bird? And she told me she didn't know. But the question, that those conversations, and I believe they happen because I can remember them. I can remember some of them. I don't remember the question about coming back as a bird, but I can remember being sort of intellectually curious about the environment, even at that age. And I simply put together that was the part that I needed to place within the practice of art for me, because this is something that was intrinsically interesting to me. And the other thing about that is that I wasn't suggesting finding this kind of strategy of making, that I was inventing a new terrains of art. So I was separate from the avant-garde in that sense, where they were very much interested in redefining the nature of art and making holistic or universal proclamations about what constitutes a work of art. And I wasn't interested in that. I found quite early that intention was problematic. I was only interested in finding a reason to make art for myself, which engaged these sort of, at the time, sort of radical thoughts about the practice. So I said that it was a struggle to find my identity. And I still think art is still invested in that struggle.
And that you're still working through that.
Yeah.
How do you find, as this amazing slideshow is moving through these bodies of work that are in the exhibition, I am seeing all the ways that we understand the subjects of your work. How do you come to them?
Well, there's the trees and other objects of the grid series, and then in the language-based work, they're texts. The images or the objects I selected in grid work are objects that lend themselves to seriation, the layering of multiple or objects of the same type on top of each other. Because, like you could see in the walnut tree orchard, when you see a walnut, when you see an orchard, you see an orchard full of walnut trees, and they're different. They are each different from each other, but they all constitute a particular species or genus of tree. So there's this interesting play of within a constrained space of redundancy and difference. And I wanted to layer the same type objects on top of each other to reveal those spaces of redundancy or duplication or spaces of difference. And let the strategy of that reveal create the image. And rather than, like copying the image or drawing the image so that meant that I would use objects that could be layered. And there's a small universe of objects that would benefit me in this regard. With the text pieces, I started out wanting to reveal a certain property of language, that language is a system. I wanted to reveal that. I was influenced by structuralism, deconstruction, and I wanted to, and semiotics, and I wanted to reveal that language is a system. But just like the objects in the grid work, I wanted to reveal it through artifacts. So in the early work, I would select these texts whose content would be in the same areas like the walnut trees. So mostly those contents were political. That's why I started out the idea of the manifestos. So that would be like a tree, right? And then through using the language system, I would reveal, again, manifestations of difference and similarities. In the language systems, those manifestations and similarities are called metaphor and metonym. And so I started out really wanting to do that. And in one presentation in LA, I was showing and talking about, actually it was the first manifesto, and this really problematic person in the audience, who was my son.
Who we shall name the artist, scholar, Malik Gaines.
Yeah.
Your son.
Yeah, he asked me, why are you obscuring the content of the politics around all of these these gauzes of what you would see on, it's essentially saying syntactical and semantical structuring. So he thought it was confusing to know what the piece was about. And so of course, I told him, you have to go to your room and you can't have dinner.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought about it, and I said I really should bring the politics more forward, because my whole idea was that that in revealing that the idea of the language as a system, I was taking intention out of it. The expression, that there was a kind of autonomous system that was the structure that you use to try to express yourself. And I was trying to reveal that part that is autonomous rather than the part that was expression. But he gave me the idea that I can do both at the same time. Simply by making the politics even more forward, because my interest was in politics, but I was dealing with it in terms of the structure of language. And so then the subject then became more specifically political at that point.
And at that point that the subjects became more political, how were you thinking that this work would be understood in the world?
Well, I was convinced nobody was ever going to be interested. No, it's true. I mean, I had a funny career because in my 30s, I was being shown in very important galleries, Lil Costelli and John Weber, and there was this thing that was told to all of us artists that, at least in terms of the career part of art, three things have to happen. You have to get the interest of a gallery, you have to get the interest of a curator, and you have to get the interest of a writer. So I got the interest of galleries, but curators and writers weren't interested in the work. And so that was something that was happening at the same time. In my pedagogy, I was teaching this course, content and form, and trying to bring into the curriculum this idea that intellect and affect can help each other, can work together. It's trying to eliminate the binary that science is about intellect and art is about affect, but saying that they're both always present. And so I was dealing with that. And so I brought in all this text to expound on these ideas. And I had very tolerant students who would listen to me and get involved in discussion. But I always thought that this is the only place where this conversation is going to take place, in the classroom. Because the people were telling me that I shouldn't be talking about art this way. Mm-hmm. So similarly, I would get gallerists who thought the work was interesting, but when I got visits from curators and writers, they couldn't wait to get out of the studio. And I think it was all this theoretical stuff that I was saying that chased them away. Mm-hmm. So I was really settled and this is okay. I remember being at a party in Manhattan, and George Sugarman was there, the sculptor, and he was so angry, and he spoiled the whole dinner party. He was complaining about, how abused he was by the art world, and writers suck and everything. And so I said, whatever I become, I don't want to be a bitter artist. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, it is what it is. And so I didn't have any regrets or anything. But then it was the 2007 with the Venice Biennale where I started getting the interest of curators. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that started changing. It started, then after the curators, and then the writers. The gallerists continued to, I was lucky because nobody was really paying much attention to my work, but the gallerists were still giving me shows. Mm-hmm. So that began to change at that point. So at this point, people complained to me that I'm too self-effacing about the attention that's happening now. And I can't help it. I still think the whole thing is a grievous error that's going on.
Hardly. I want to pause on, something you mentioned, because I think that while we are here in the exhibitions, of course, make us understand the foundational place you have in the canon of art history, what I always, that I talk about is the other contribution that I think has been significant, and that is the one that you made, the practice in the classroom. As a teacher who taught so many artists, and among them, a kind of community of thought, action, and values that I know for me as a curator has changed the trajectory, right, in so many ways. And, I've said to Charles before that before I met Charles, I knew of him as a teacher. He was teaching many of the artists of my generation. And often when they said something profound, they would credit Charles with that thought. Now, some of them would say it like they said it, but it was too smart and good. And then you'd be like, Charles said that. And so I, sort of came of age in my own thinking with these ideas that came from Charles, that you were putting in the classroom, really allowing people to find really profound paths in art. But then as a very, 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 very young curator who thought I had ideas already about art, when you invited me to come to your convening around the exhibition you curated, so you all here now, artist, right? Professor, curator, and there are a couple other roles you occupy. But you invited me to Theater of Refusal, and that was profound because what you were saying to me is that there was space for my ideas, right, in this kind of larger conversation. And I will forever be grateful for that, forever. So thank you. Thank you.
I guess I have to embrace what you said because I don't think I deserve it.
Right, no, I know, but I'm gonna keep saying it. So, but let's talk about teaching. Because again, in teaching, you could shape, in some ways, some of these ideas that informed not just your work specifically, but your idea of what you thought art practice could be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits I see as a benefit now that I took this rather, abstract or systematic approach to content, is that it allowed me to have a more open-ended idea of what can be done in works of art. Now, I was a young artist at a time when very few black artists and artists of color and women, weren't getting exhibitions, and the racism of the art world was clear to everybody, except like white people, But
that's often how it goes, right?
Yeah, and because of that, because of the clear racism of the art world, this issue of racism became important to a lot of black artists. And so there were black artists who thought you should focus on the representation of your own culture. This was a problem for me because I was interested in this experiment with the nature of the construction of knowledge, the construction of language, the systems that you use to form ideas about it. And I didn't want to get it back into I didn't want to do art that was specifically narrative because it required me to embrace the subjective practices again. And so I was so at the time it was believed I was doing white art, and I'm not the only black artist who got that grief. Ed Clark got it too, and others, but this idea. Isolated me at the time, but I was grateful. Well, let me put it this way: I thought the question of whether I was doing white art or because this idea of universal art I didn't believe in, and so I couldn't say no, I'm not doing white art. I'm doing universal art.
Right.
I couldn't do that. That argument made no sense to me. But I thought it was a good question. In other words, try to think about critically what you think you're doing, and how that functions and responsive to the social and cultural environment that you live. And it wasn't until later that I came to connect the idea of art making to temperament. But I think that because I never, that I had this distance from narrative early on, I think that helped me actually discover, what identity meant for me, and had a broader notion. Because ultimately I made the argument that I'm not making white art, but I'm making art that deals with my temperament. And my temperament is my own, and it's not others. So I'm not creating a whole new ideology of art practice. Nor was I rejecting my cultural and social experience of being a black person in the United States, because I felt that my interest, that idea of temperament, that interest came directly from my experience as a kid and living in the Jim Crow South and being completely befuddled and confused about why are these rules for white and black people different to keep them separate. In fact, it was suggested to me that I'm very interested in what I come back was a kind of poetic expression of dissatisfaction of living in a racist society. Because so maybe if when I come back, like I won't come back to a world that's racist. I didn't think that at five.
No.
But that was how
you felt
I made the argument that I'm actually coming out of my experience as a black person.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I want to talk about the fact that in making art, that you're making art cross media, right? We've seen drawing, photography, the grid works, which involve 3 dimensions, sculpture, installation, and music. How do you think about medium?
Yeah, discovering that the idea that I'd expand artistic practice from just painting to, making these object-based systems also allowed me to get the benefit of what I think that Fluxus and conceptualism did, was that unbound us from genres. And so I'm kind of a eclectic person. I have many interests, and I guess it's still reflective of this idea of a temperament, but thinking in different forms and different ways through these different interests was natural to me. So because I did that anyway. When I was going to studying art as a kid, I also studied music, and there was a point where I had to make a decision whether I was going to continue as a professional musician or go to graduate school for art. And I decided to go to graduate school, but
why?
I think so why? I think it was. Because I was pretty much focused on jazz, and I knew like a lot of jazz musicians, and I saw how grim their lives were, and so I thought, it's not that, in art you have it's a cakewalk, but you wouldn't have to deal with drugs and be in bars all the time, and in fact, I did continue playing while I was in school. I played for these groups, and we played in bars, and there was every week there was a fight, and the images. We joked among each other, when the beer bottles fly, just grab your instrument and run. And
Right.
I had a drum set, so but I
art
thought
became your path.
Yeah, I thought that. Well, ultimately, maybe things will improve if I remain in music, but jazz is rough. If I had become a percussionist for an orchestra, for example, that would have been a different story. But I knew that I didn't want to do that. I was much more interested in playing jazz, and
yeah.
so that was really a motivating factor going into continuing my art studies.
Right. We're going to open it up for questions in a moment, but before we do that, Charles, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the work that you made here and how you think about that work in relation to now this trajectory that we've gotten a chance to see in the galleries.
Yeah, this goes back to your earlier question, because I always felt there was that the different strategies of making that makes up the show were centralized around a very specific idea, and that's systems and the idea of being able to have what you would call an aesthetic experience that required the use of your intellect rather than the rejection of intellectual practices. And when you see a body of work, you know, more than one, you get a better idea of that. And this is what I appreciate about this exhibition. When you just see, for example, the grid work, then you can get lost in the aesthetics, you know, but when you have to deal with a system that deals with a Stokely-Carmichael text, then you have to deal with content. And it helps that that work helps people see that the system is really is really a you know, a critical construction. Right. It's not just for creating pretty images, but it's actually a critical articulation. And a show of this size, I really think that makes that much more clear.
Yeah. All right, I'm wondering if anyone in this audience has a question for Charles Gaines. Yes. Oh, there's a microphone. 1 second. It's coming to you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Hey, Charles. You know, I've always been interested about the expectations that are placed on artists, especially nowadays with everything that is going on with politics. There's some people that have the expectation of artists to act as activists. Obviously,
as what?
Activists.
Activists.
Right, like to speak, like partly what you said about that shift in the representation, right? As artists, sometimes I feel pressured to create work that represents my culture and decide the kind of light that we shed onto that, right? But sometimes when I'm creating, I'm not really thinking too much about my culture. I'm thinking about my feelings, right? What's going through me and how can I let that out onto the canvas? So my question to you, seeing that your work, it's kind of on the other side of the spectrum, right? I'm very much about expression and emotions, and you're very much about intellect and systems. I'm wondering what you believe the role of the artist is in today's society.
I think, well, there are not a lot of the parts of the history of Enlightenment ideas that I can embrace. But the one thing that I can embrace is the Enlightenment's idea of knowledge and a lot more knowledge acquisition. And so I think that artists are part of a larger population of people whose vocation is to produce knowledge. And of course, artists are dealing with images and so forth. So it's not necessarily text. But if you're going to produce knowledge, then as an artist, you have to deal with concepts. So I think that's it. And the question is more that the relationship of the knowledge that you see as concepts and ideas in your work is more about what those concepts and ideas mean to you. It's not just about how they make you feel, but what do they mean to you? And that overrides anybody's opinion that you have to make a particular kind of work. The biggest argument against that is that every 5 years the art world changes. The discourses change. I mean, what interests people change. And so if people are going to beat you on the head because you're not reflecting your culture, then 5 years from now, they won't remember they told you that.
Thank you, Charles. Another question?
Good evening. Hi, Mr. Gaines. A common theme that has come up through this lecture has been like the afterlife. Like you mentioned, as a small child, you asked your mother, like, will I come back as a bird? And then you mentioned with age, you thought maybe I will come back and there won't be racism. I was curious if you could elaborate more on your thoughts on the afterlife, how it's presented in your art, and how it has changed throughout your life, your perspective on coming back, because that's something that's come up a few times in the lecture tonight. Does that make sense?
If I understood your question correctly, the question of I'm going to interpret the idea of the afterlife as some general search for meaning, rather than whether I'm going to get wings when I die. So and I think I tried to express that the whole project is about the search for meaning. My criticism of subjectivity or subjective expression, the criticism that I have about it is that it's a construct that allows you or relieves you the responsibility to think, because it's about the responsibility to feel. I think that feeling, the expression of feeling is very important, and I'm not creating in this binary something that privileges one over the other. I'm just saying that in terms of my own temperament and experience, that I found that there's this ideology of self-expression that's put into place to keep you from thinking. And so then in terms of my discussion, then I emphasize the issue of thinking, but I don't dismiss feeling, because I deal with the issue of feeling through the system. That is, that the system is clearly random. So you can intellectually understand how the system constructs itself, but you can't intellectually understand what this means. So that takes some kind of also investment of your feelings, but that investment of feeling isn't the thing that you're told has to drive the work of art. That investment feeling is a discovery that you make, that you have to, that you find that you have to invest yourself in when you're looking at a work of art.
Yeah.
Just for one more.
Oh.
We're going to have a riot down here.
Okay, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I actually saw the exhibition last week, and I sort of often look to art to find answers in difficult moments, and I think seeing the exhibition was really, I guess, powerful. I mean, it in the sense that in the way that it sort of is intertwined with a critique and a form of knowledge. Sort of I'm wondering, in this specific moment in the history of the US, and also thinking of this sort of, I guess, the idea of the future perfect, something that is not completely realized and it continues to haunt us. How will your work continue to engage contextually and socially and politically in the way you've been doing? Is it changing in any way? I mean, is this what's happening different or not in the way that your work is going to continue to function?
I need clarification. Are you asking, is my work changing in the face of?
Well, in the face of what's happening now,
on
for me, I did find an enormous amount of engagement now, give me a sense of this moment in time in the US. But what does it mean for you to continue to create in this specific moment in time where there is this delayed, I guess, arrival of so many issues that have been faced in your work?
Thelma, I think this is what we were talking about before. The issue about what we talked about is that how relevant the word. Yeah.
I was saying, even preparing for this over these weeks, that so much of not only Charles's body of work, but some of the works that exist in his work could have been created right at this moment. And in a way, it makes me think also, in a way, how I think about your work, in that so much of it, right, and we see that 70s, 80s, predicted, right? It's future making, it predicted into the moment we're in now. So it feels as if perhaps maybe the question is not so much how Charles is going to respond now, but how grateful we are that Charles made all of this work to give us a way to engage and feel and think. Right now. And that was, thank you, that's a perfect segue, because we are now going to end with Charles giving us some thoughts about the manifestos pieces, and there are some images that are going to move, and perhaps you might talk about manifestos, which we're going to see live, but the excerpt that you'd like to show in advance of that.
Yes. Just briefly, we're going to talk about the manifesto series. It was an idea. Well, it was an idea that was helped by my friendship with Terry Atkins. So Terry Atkins was also a musician as well as an artist, and we became friends. And there's this thing of art and music was something that we shared. But for years and years, I did not know how to make the art and the music come together. My interest in art and my interest in music seemed to be separate, and even to the degree where what I was interested in terms of tropes of affect operated differently in musical language than it did in art language to me. So I didn't think there was a way that I could bridge those interests as part of a singular practice, but Terry didn't have any trouble with that. That multiplicity of interest developed out of made itself possible through his performance work, and so that's when I started to think about. I don't know, it's probably with Terry, but that's when I thought that, if I deal with systems in terms of numbers and grids, with the grid work, maybe in dealing with systems in terms of language, maybe I could use the music theory as a system, which would be the gateway for me to bring music into the work. And so what I did was that I came up with a system strategy, where I took a text and I converted the letters of the text into musical notes. So you can see that if you have the word tree, for example, T and R would be rest. They wouldn't be notes, but they would be silent beats of rest. But E and E would be an E note followed by an E note. And happy, H is the rest, but A is the A note. So I just followed the sequence of letters in the text, and I converted it to either rests or notes, depending on how it came up in the sequence. And then I played it, listening for melodies. And when I found the melody, I would chart that out, and then take the raw translation. And what you see here is these drawings. They come what I call the raw translation. That's translating the letters to notes. But I would take that raw translation and write a manuscript for an ensemble. And in that manuscript, I would elaborate on the melodies that the raw translation revealed to me.
So let's, if we could, play a few moments of the full manifestos with the full set of musicians, a few moments of it.
Yeah, in fact, this is great because you hear an ensemble, but then we have this incredible opportunity here. Richard Balazuto playing Manifestos 3 on the piano. Rich is the most amazing pianist in the world. So you're in for a real treat.
Right.
But we have this short performance that we did at MoMA just several months ago. And we'll play that for you first as an introduction, segue into then Rich's performance.
Right, so we have about 2 minutes of that video.
Can you give us more volume?
Thank you. Charles, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
this. Thank you.